So first I would like to thank for the invitation to this wonderful conference and also for the introduction. When I get an introduction like that, it makes me feel ambivalent. It's wonderful to hear so many nice things about myself, but it creates a kind of an aura of expectation that it's not easy to live up to. Okay, what I would like to do tonight is to share with you basically observations and experiences of the study of non-ordinary states that, as you heard now, extended over half a century. And I would like to start actually by asking you a few questions. This is with apology to those who were with me in the pre-conference workshop. We have to do a little repetition. Can you read it? Yes. The question would be, how many of you experience in your own life any of the types of experiences that are... Don't raise your hands until we finish. Have you finished the whole list? Can I see the hands now? How many of you know those experiences from your personal life? Okay. Again, you can look around. This is quite amazing. This is the kind of response that we get basically anywhere where we come, which is very interesting because current psychiatry and psychology does not recognize these experiences or tends to pathologize them. So I've so far used the term non-ordinary states of consciousness. Psychiatry and psychology actually uses a different term, which is altered states. And I really don't like that term because it sounds pejorative, sounds so that we have a correct way of experiencing ourselves and the world, and then in these altered states, that perception is altered, is distorted in some sense. I always think about veterinary medicine when you get your dog altered. So I have great awe and respect to these experiences, to call them altered. And that term non-ordinary is a little better, but still does not really cover somehow the field that I have been interested in. I have been interested in an important subgroup, large subgroup of these non-ordinary experiences that have healing potential, that have transformative potential, that have, I believe, evolutionary potential, and also heuristic potential. It means that if we study them or have those experiences personally, we get access to new revolutionary information about the human psyche, about consciousness, and even about the nature of reality. I really believe that if we study these experiences systematically, that it would lead to a revolution in psychology, psychiatry, and psychotherapy that would be comparable to what the physicists went through in the first 3 decades of the 20th century, when they had to go from Newton first to the theories of relativity and then to quantum physics that even Einstein himself was not able to accept until the end of his life. And I really believe that it would also be a complement to the changes that already happened in our understanding of matter. That while physicists made this enormous progress in the 20th century, that the other disciplines that originally modeled themselves after physics stayed still in the 17th century. Somehow need to bring those two together and also bring spirituality and science together. So since I haven't found a name for this category of experiences, I decided to actually make one myself and started calling them holotropic. That term is a composite word from Greek, where holos means whole, and trepein means moving in the direction of something. So holotropic means moving toward wholeness. Now, if I say that, I frequently get the response, what do you mean, moving toward wholeness? Aren't we already whole? The way we experience ourselves in our everyday state of consciousness. And I would have to say no. We just experience ourselves as a fragment of who we really are, or a fragment of our experiential potentials. And I usually refer to Hinduism, where in the Upanishads you have the question, who are we? Who are you? And the answer in Sanskrit is tattvam asi, which is usually translated in kind of archaic English, thou art that, or you are it with a capital I, means we are not nama rupa, we are not name and shape. Our deepest identity is with a spark of divine creative energy that we carry in our innermost being. The Hindus call it Atman, and this is not a belief or delusion of the Hindus. This is something that can be pragmatically verified in these holotropic states of consciousness. And if we follow, for example, the different schools of yoga, we all would have the potential to experience that divine core. And when we have that experience, we would recognize that energy that we carry within is identical with the creative energy that is responsible for the universe. So what are the experiences that we talk about? This would be experiences that the shamans have during the initiatory crisis, when they have this visionary state that takes them into the underworld. They're exposed to ordeals. They experience dismemberment and death and annihilation, and then psychospiritual rebirth and journey into the supernal realms. And during this journey, they heal themselves from various emotional, psychosomatic, sometimes even physical diseases. The anthropologists call them wounded healers. And not only do they heal themselves, but they learn how to heal others. Mainly working with energy. The idea, like in Chinese medicine, is that blocked energy is conducive to pathology, to disease, and when the vital energies are flowing, it's the best prevention of diseases, and also the best thing that we can do for our healing. This is also the category of experiences that the shamans then induce in their clients or experience themselves when they are healing. They use for their healing practice. The second category, when we find these experiences, are the so-called rites of passage. This is a term that came from Arnold van Gennep, a Dutch anthropologist who studied a number of native cultures, and he found that practically all of them have very important ritual events that they conduct at the time of some important biological or social transitions. For example, birth of a child, circumcision, puberty, marriage, menopause, dying. So in all these rituals, they use what I call technologies of the sacred. In other words, methods of various kinds that induce these holotropic states of consciousness. And typically in these rituals, it takes the form of, again, psychospiritual death and rebirth. So for example, in the puberty rites, the idea is that the boys and girls who go into the ritual die as young people, and they are born or reborn as adults with all the rights and all the duties. that the adults have. There's a whole range of methods that they are using, including chanting, dancing, fasting, sleep deprivation, vision quest in the mountains or in the desert or in the Arctic ice. Very frequently they use some extreme physiological means like inflicting pain, for example, or bloodletting or sub-incision. And also many of these cultures use psychedelic plants to induce these holotropic states. Then another category of these experiences are experiences of the initiates of the death rebirth mysteries. So in many parts of the world, there were powerful mythologies about gods, demigods, legendary heroes who experienced death in one way or another and then were resurrected, or they visited the underworld, the realm of death, and returned. So those were, for example, the mysteries of Inanna and Dumuzi in ancient Sumer, the mysteries of Isis and Osiris in Egypt, the mysteries of Attis, Adonis, the Bacchanalia, the Dionysian rites, and especially the mysteries in Eleusis, based on the story of Hades abducting Persephone and then returning her for part of the year. Now, these were extremely important in antiquity. A number of very prominent personalities were initiates in these ancient mysteries, including Plato, Aristotle, Alcibiades, Marcus Aurelius, Cicero, Pindaros. So actually the list of these people who were initiates, lists like who's who in the antique world. And when Christina and I visited Eleusis, we saw the ruins of the Telestrion where these mysteries took place. And we asked the guide, how many people had these experiences here? And he said about 3,000 at a time. For a period of almost 2,000 years, every 5 years, 3,000 of these initiates. So obviously they had to offer something quite impressive to keep the attention of the ancient world. Albert Hofmann, the discoverer of LSD, Gordon Wasson, who brought the Mazatec magic mushrooms to Europe and gave them to Albert Hofmann for analysis. And Karl Rack, a Greek scholar, wrote a book which was called Road to Eleusis. And they showed that the key to these mysteries was a beverage, sacred beverage, which was called Kykeon, Kykeon, that was given to the initiates at a certain critical time of these mysteries, and that this was a beverage that was made of ergot, very similar in its effects to LSD. Then we have also the technologies of the sacred, which were developed by some of the great religions. So different schools of yoga, different forms of Buddhist meditation, Taoistic practices, Kabbalistic exercises, the Jesus prayer or hesychasm in the Christian tradition. So those were all methods to induce these experiences. My own introduction to these experiences was when, as a beginning psychiatrist, I volunteered for an LSD session, and I had a very, very powerful experience of cosmic consciousness. This was a combination, actually, of LSD and powerful stroboscopic light. The man who was my preceptor, who got the substance from Sandoz from Switzerland, was very interested in EEG, electroencephalography, and at the time when we were having these experiences, he was particularly interested in what's called driving the brain waves or entraining the brain waves, which means exposing people to very powerful stroboscopic light and trying to find out if the brain waves in the suboccipital area would pick up the frequency. So in the middle of my session, when the experience was culminated, I was exposed to this powerful stroboscopic light, and I have never been the same. I mean, it was an extremely powerful experience in which my consciousness left my body. I experienced complete annihilation, end of who I thought I was, and by becoming nothing, I had the feeling I became everything. I had the feeling I became all of existence. And then coming down from the experience, I floated for a while. My consciousness floated for a while around my body, and I was trying to align those two together. And at that point, it became clear to me that consciousness was something much, much bigger than a product of the neurophysiological processes in the brain. And I was very, very impressed by that experience. And I was experiencing a crisis at that point. I started studying medicine because I wanted to become a psychoanalyst. And at this time, when I had this psychedelic session, I started realizing the limitations of psychoanalysis. You know, how long it takes, how much it costs, how much energy, and that the results were not exactly breathtaking. And I started sort of thinking nostalgically back on my original plans. I wanted to work in animated movies. You know, in retrospect, I didn't get very far from the animated movies, only animated movies of a different kind. So I spent about half of the time doing clinical work with psychedelics for therapeutic purposes and also as an exploratory tool, first in the Psychiatric Research Institute in Prague, and then in the United States at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center, where for several years I was was the chief of psychiatric research in this institute and was heading the last surviving official psychedelic research project. And then in the second half, Christina and I developed the holotropic breathwork when we were living at Estelen. The holotropic breathwork uses just faster breathing, powerful evocative music, and a certain kind of body work, followed by what we call mandala drawing and sharing of the experience. And you know, to our surprise, we see the same range of experiences that we saw have seen in psychedelic sessions. And I will, in a minute, I will describe what those experiences were. So I was doing this work with psychedelics, then with the holotropic breathwork, and Christina and myself also guided number of people in states, spontaneous episodes of holotropic states that traditionally would be called psychotic states, but after the experiences with first with psychedelics and then later with the breathwork, we realized that we can work with those experiences the same way that we worked with people in psychedelic sessions or in the holotropic sessions. That there is a significant subgroup of people who are currently diagnosed as psychotic and treated by suppressive medication who can actually use this state because it's an attempt, it's a self-healing attempt of the the organism and of the psyche. So we coined the term spiritual emergency, which is a kind of play on words. Emergo, emergere in Latin means to emerge. If a situation emerges suddenly and surprises us, we call it emergency. So these states certainly are problems. They can interfere with people's lives, but if they are properly understood and supported, they can actually be healing and transformative. 1980, Christina started something called the Spiritual Emergency Network that had very complex history. We first ran it in Esalen for 4 years when we had a house from Dick Price and 4 work scholars who were working with the computer and were on the line. And then it moved for a while to Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, and then it ended up at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where it had, wonderful place and telephone lines. But then when the funds were cut for the school, that was the most, was a, program that was easiest to cancel. So at this point, there is a computer with all the data, and there is one person who is volunteer and is willing to answer some of the phone calls without getting paid for it. But this spiritual emergency or spiritual emergence network now exists in many, many countries of the world, and we hope that one day it's going to be resurrected again when the economy will get a little better, if it does. So I have worked with these different forms of holotropic states, and it became clear very, very quickly that the experiences and the observations of events around these experiences, for example, some extraordinary synchronicities, that they cannot be accounted for if you use the current model that we have in psychiatry and psychology. So I was writing books and papers sort of describing these experiences and the implications that I believe they had for various areas in psychology and psychiatry and even understanding reality. And when I was approaching my 70th birthday, I got a phone call from my editor, Jane Bunker, at SUNY Press, and she said, Stan, we have published several of your books, different aspects of your work. Would you consider writing one book that would kind of sum it up and would be kind of introduction to the already existing books? And then there was a pause, and then she said, well, and would you specifically focus on those observations that current psychiatry and psychology cannot explain? And there was an even longer pause, and then she said, and would you just sketch what psychiatry and psychology should look like if it would sort of integrate and accommodate these kinds of experiences? So this is what we call tall order. But I was very excited because I was planning at the time to retire, or at least semi-retire. And we had the holotropic breathwork happening all over the world. There was a whole new generation of people who were trainers, facilitators, and we needed a manual. And this was like offer to publish a manual for us. So I decided to write the book, and I gave it a kind of deliberately provocative title, Psychology of the Future. I felt that if you write books like The Holotropic Mind or Beyond the Brain, that people can take it or leave it. If you say this is psychology of the future, people either get excited or they get pissed and irritated. How can you dare,
Either way, they'll lie.
So this is the book that summarized at the time, this was way back, this was 12 years ago, summarized the observations. I'm 82 now, so this is the time where people look back. So I'm now working on a paper that I call legacy paper, that Christina is not very excited about the title because it looks feels terminal to her, you know. So she would like me to hang around for a while. So I will just now summarize some of the things from this paper, describing the categories where I believe psychology and psychiatry should be radically changed to accommodate all these observations from these holotropic states. Let me see. Maybe I should say one thing I mentioned about something about the divine within, about the Atman, Brahman. So I just saw this page here where there are statements from other religions showing that the revelation of the fundamental unity of the individual and the divine is really at the mystical core of all major religions. So if you want, you can read these statements from different religions. Can you read it in the back? Okay. Okay, so I will talk about the implications of the research of holotropic states. Now, the first change that, in my opinion, should be made in psychiatry and psychology is to vastly expand the model of the psyche that we have. We have a model of the psyche which is limited to postnatal biography and to the Freudian individual unconscious, which is also a derivative of the postnatal biography, things that we have forgotten, that we have repressed, that we rejected, that we cannot accept, and so on. And if we work with holotropic states, the experiences simply will not stay, you know, with this kind of very limited range, and you will see the experiences moving to deeper realms of the unconscious, and the first domain that emerged in this work, first with psychedelics, but then repeatedly in holotropic breathwork and also people in spiritual emergency, were experiences that I call perinatal. It turned out that we carry a powerful imprint, powerful memory of all the stages of biological birth. All the difficult emotions, all the difficult physical sensations are still recorded in our unconscious, and they represent a pool out of which various difficulties can form in interaction with postnatal traumas. I actually was able to distinguish 4 experiential patterns when the process of self-exploration regresses to birth. The experiences come in 4 experiential clusters, and you can relate them to the consecutive stages of birth. And I will show you later the scheme. But the first matrix would be the situation when the fetus is still in the womb, in a kind of an advanced stage of pregnancy before the delivery starts. The second would be when the contractions start, but the cervix is not open. The third matrix is the situation of the struggle through the birth canal, and then the fourth matrix is the actual coming out. So all this is recorded in our unconscious, and it's quite amazing that it's not acknowledged in psychiatry. Usually the reason for it is given that the cortex of the newborn is not myelinized. The neurons are not covered by the kind of a fatty substance, which is called myelin. But it's extraordinary that the same argument is not used against the fact that the situation immediately after birth is important. There's a general agreement that even exchange of looks between the mother and the child is important and can influence the whole future relationship. And certainly nursing is seen as very important. We have now experiences from prenatal research showing tremendous sensitivity of the fetus already in the womb. So we have now the fetus sensitive in the womb, sensitive immediately after birth, but the hours of birth are not seen as a psychotrauma. We pay attention to it in psychiatry only if it's so bad that it damages the brain cells, but just the experience of birth is not seen as a trauma. Now this would have to change, because this absolutely obvious to people, who did some inner exploration, that there is a powerful record of birth, and that it has great significance for our later life. And then beyond that, there is also a vast area which we now call transpersonal. Again, not acknowledged in academic psychiatry. It shows quite a bit of overlap with the Jungian concept of the collective unconscious, the historical and the archetypal unconscious. So we need a vast cartography of the psyche that includes the postnatal, the biographical domain, includes the perinatal domain with the 4 distinct matrices, and then the transpersonal domain, where we can have experiences of identification with other people, group consciousness, experiential identification with animals. We can have experiences in other centuries, sometimes with the sense of personal remembering. Then we talk about past life experiences, a very, very important category of experiences with tremendous therapeutic potential. None of this is currently incorporated in the model of the psyche, which is used in clinical psychiatry. Certainly, it's known to people who work outside of mainstream psychiatry, in different workshops and sort of. Certainly Jungians and people who do rebirthing and work with breath work, they are aware of this vast cartography, but it somehow has not been acknowledged to my knowledge, in academic circles. Then the second, very, very important change that will have to be done is in the understanding of the relationship between matter and consciousness, or specifically brain and consciousness. Very few people realize that we have absolutely no proof that consciousness comes from the brain. We have enormous number of observations from clinical neurology, from experimental psychiatry, and other areas showing that there are systematic correlations between the anatomy and physiology of the brain and states of consciousness. But none of it is really proof that consciousness is coming from the brain. So the question is not about the correlations, they are definitely there, but the conclusion that was made is in formal logic known as non sequitur. It doesn't really follow. And to know what I mean, you can just look at the television set, where the quality of the sound and the picture depends critically on the conditions of the TV set. But we would laugh at somebody who would, try to study the transistors and the transformers and the wires down to the subcellular level or subatomic level, and believe that they will understand why at 7 o'clock a Mickey Mouse cartoon sort of showed up. So the correlation does not necessarily mean proof that the program is coming from the box. It also leaves open the possibility that the set mediates consciousness but doesn't really create it. So we have actually a large number of observations that show that consciousness can do things that the brain cannot possibly do. And I could give you many examples of transpersonal experiences, but I will just mention one category that you all know, which are the near-death experiences, where people in a state of cardiac arrest and also with a flat EEG can have experiences of consciousness leaving the body and maintains the perceptual ability, can observe what's happening in the room, can travel to other rooms of the building, can have accurate perception of what's happening there, can experience something that's happening hundreds of miles away. And if you have an open-minded researcher, they will find out that those were accurate perception. And now we have also studies by Ken Rink and his co-worker Valerino about blind people who are organically blind since birth, and when they leave, when consciousness leaves the body, they can actually see. And Ken Rink talks about veridical out-of-body experiences. They not only see, but what is there can actually be validated by people who have the gift of sight. The next category would be the architecture of emotional psychosomatic disorders. In current psychiatry, if the problem is not organic, it doesn't have biological reasons, the idea is that it started sometime after birth. And for example, in classical psychoanalysis, we link different emotional problems to stages of the libido development, the fixation of libido. There are problems which are oral, like depression or alcoholism or addiction, problems that are seen as anal, like obsessive compulsive neurosis, then things that are seen as what Freud called phallic, at the time of the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex, which would be different phobias or hysteria in classical psychoanalysis. So if you work with these holotropic states and you're just about to end soon, yeah? How much time do we have? Can somebody who's following it? Okay, I'll go fast. So if you work with holotropic states, you will always find connections to something that happened in childhood and infancy, so that it's not wrong what you find in psychoanalysis. The only problem, it's not all there is. You will find deeper roots, additional roots that go to one of the perinatal matrices, and then even deeper to some transpersonal phenomena. For example, a past life experience can be at the depth of an emotional problem. Or there could be some archetypal material, even phylogenetic. It takes you to animal ancestors. Now this looks like very bad news. We thought all we have to do is to clear something from our childhood history, and now the playground is much, much bigger. But the good news is that there are powerful healing therapeutic mechanisms on the perinatal level and the transpersonal level. For example, reliving birth and integrating the emotions and the physical feelings can be very therapeutic. It can alleviate a whole range of problems like claustrophobia, depression, migraine headaches, psychosomatic asthma, proneness to violence, to aggression, and so on. A very powerful healing mechanism is something that's actually seen currently as a psychotic experience, which is the experience of cosmic unity, experience of oneness with other people, oneness with nature, oneness with the universe, oneness with the divine. If this experience is supported and is allowed to be completed and integrated, it's much more powerful healing mechanism than anything we have to offer in current psychiatry and psychology. I will just say something about the strategy of self-exploration, psychotherapy. We have enormous number of schools of psychotherapy, and each school tells us something different about what are the major motivating forces in the psyche. Is it sex, the way Freud saw it? Is it inferiority complex that we try to overcompensate, as Adler saw it? Is it that society doesn't allow us to have full sexual life, the way Wilhelm Reich saw it? So each school will give us a different story. So if we have a problem, we can flip a coin, and with each school comes a different story, different explanation, and each school will offer a different technique that we use with our clients. There exist studies showing that there is really no significant statistical difference between the therapeutic results of these schools. That if anything, the differences are inside of the schools. There are better therapists and not so good therapists inside of the schools, but you cannot say that statistically one school or another offers better results. And some of these studies show that what really works in psychotherapy is something that the therapists usually don't think about, and it's very difficult to put into scientific language, something like the quality of human encounter between the therapist and the client, or the feeling of the client of being unconditionally accepted by another human being, frequently for the first time in their lives, and factors of this kind. So what is the holotropic alternative? It's very interesting. It shows that if you are in a holotropic state of these different categories, I'm not talking just about the breathwork, but all the different categories. If you are in a holotropic state, it mobilizes self-healing mechanism, self-healing potential in the psyche. And when we work with these states, we become more like midwives or co-adventurers. We are not the fixers who come with sort of brilliant insights and interpretations. The interpretations would be, for the same thing, would be different depending on the school. Whereas in the holotropic states, you just simply support what is happening, and we would support it. We have such trust in the process now that we would support it even if we don't at times understand what is happening. We believe that there is a deeper intelligence that's sort of operating in these states. I think I will just take the one which is the most obvious one, which is spirituality. Western science is materialistic. Philosophy is monistic materialism. So the history of the universe is the history of developing matter. And life, consciousness, intelligence are kind of latecomers, more or less like a fluke, something that happened in an insignificant part of a universe that has billions of galaxies. So if you have this kind of a worldview and you start speaking about spirit, something spiritual, well, what are you talking about? Haven't you learned your science? Don't you know what materialistic science discovered about the universe? So when somebody is spiritual from a strictly sort of materialistic scientific point of view, this is superstition. This is called magical primitive thinking. And if you have an intelligent person and that person still talks about God or goddess, then we have psychoanalysis. This is in our infancy, we saw our parents as these godlike figures, and it persists in our psyche, and we kind of project it and make gods and goddesses out of them. And then if you have direct experiences of spiritual experiences, which would be the perinatal or the transpersonal experiences, you would be seen as having a mental disease. We don't have in current psychiatry a category. This is a mystical experience. This is a spiritual experience. So people get diagnoses for experiences that in other cultures would be seen as extremely valuable. Ramdas gives this great example when he was with Karoli Baba, and he had powerful mystical experience and got the munchies and went down to the village and wanted to buy some cookies, and so he took the cookies and wanted to pay, and this guy looked into his eyes and says, "Namaste, this is not about money, not today." You saw that he was in a special, state of mind, and this was from another dimension. This was something to be honored. Now, let me just say what I believe would be the problems when these kinds of revisions are not made in psychiatry and psychology. One thing would be that our understanding of emotional and psychosomatic disorders would be superficial and inadequate, because we would be missing the deeper roots that come from the perinatal and the transpersonal level. It also means that to do effective therapy, we would have to have tools that can reach those deeper levels. The other thing, without those changes, without expanding the cartography, we would not be able to understand in current psychiatry phenomena like shamanism, for example, like rites of passage, or what people were doing in these mysteries, or even what people are trying to do in Buddhist meditation or Zen meditation. We don't have categories for that in current psychiatry, other than maybe believing that meditation is good for relaxation, but not as a tool for philosophical and spiritual discovery. If we don't make these changes, it would also be difficult for the academic circles to accept psychedelics as therapeutic tools, because the idea would be that we are trying to heal people by inducing experiences that would be currently considered psychotic. In other words, if those experiences would happen spontaneously, people would get a diagnosis and there would be a tendency to suppress this. So how can we sort of heal people by creating psychotic experiences? So I think I ran out of my time. If you are interested, you can look at my website, personal website, which is my full name, stanislavgrof.com, where this would be presented, in a little more articulate way, a little more detailed way. I had also, I think, one note about the fact that I've been working with Rick Tarnas using archetypal astrology. So those of you who are interested in that even more controversial area than psychedelics, there are about 3 papers on that website. And there were several people today and in the pre-conference workshop asking about the holotropic training for facilitators, or even participating in the training, even if you don't want to become a facilitator, just for your own personal interest. This would be another website, which is holotropic.com, that would describe that training, what the training is about. So I'm sorry for dashing through this, but they said in ancient Rome, vita brevis ars longa, means the art is long and the life is short. So, I was trying to cover a big territory in 45 minutes. So thank you very much for your patience.